Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
Today we continue our series on the Kalevala, the epic national poem of Finland. We've been really enjoying this series so far, and today we're going to cover Runo 2, Väinämöinen's Sowing. Dan, you mind telling our listeners about where we kind of left things off?
For sure. So in Runo 1, we had the creation of the world, sort of the meshing of air and water, and a bird that, a teal, a duck that laid eggs, all that kind of stuff. We go through it in quite a bit of detail in our first 2 episodes on the Kalevala, so be sure to check that out. At the end of all that, Väinämöinen is born and sort of goes off into the world to explore and gain wisdom and that kind of thing. And so we meet him after exploring. He has found this barren land that has no trees or anything, and he lands there, and he's sort of trying to figure out what to do and how to make life grow on it.
Perfect setup. Okay, I think probably going to just dive in then.
Let's go for it.
Okay. Again, this is Runo 2, Väinämöinen's Sowing. Then did Väinämöinen rising, set his feet upon the surface of a sea-encircled island in a region bare of forest. There he dwelt, while years passed over, and his dwelling he established, on the silent, voiceless island in a barren, treeless country. Then he pondered and reflected. In his mind he turned it over. Who shall sow this barren country, thickly scattering seeds around him? Dan, what does that mean?
Well, we are brought right back to that sort of prehistoric, origin of everything. So we've had the raw stuff made, and now it's time to get to the sort of the explanation of why the world is the way it is around the people of Finland. And it's very interesting because he talks about, a region bare of forest. And Finland is one of, if not the most forested area in Europe. So not having forest there is it's the exact opposite of what it is. So it really brings home the idea that this is the Finland that they're talking about right now is not the one that people live in right, as they're hearing the story. And it's showing the transition of how it went from this barren area to the lovely forested area that we all know about Finland to be now. And I find it very interesting with the last line in the bit that you read, where Väinämöinen asks, "Who shall sow this barren country?" And thickly scattering seeds around him. It's interesting because you'd kind of expect Väinämöinen to be the one to do it, and in some ways he is, but there are other people who are actually going to be doing I'd say the hard lifting and the work. And we're going to see that coming up right away. But I just find it interesting that he's not the one doing it. It's sort of this idea that even though Väinämöinen is kind of the main, the main figure in these stories, there's still things that he isn't best suited to do. I'm sure he could do this himself, but there are people or entities that are better suited at doing this kind of thing. So it also strikes me that he's also a part of the world, even though I'm going to assume he's got sort of magical powers to order the world. He's still a part of it and subject to it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think the role of Väinämöinen is possibly going to emerge a little more through the rest of this current poem. Since you brought it up, though, my thoughts on how Väinämöinen relates to all this is that he really is more of a hero character in the sense that he is sort of not only human. He's certainly more than human, but in my view, he very much reflects the role of humanity as opposed to other supernatural beings that play the more traditional roles of gods. And again, I think this is going to be revealed pretty well in the rest of the poem, so I don't want to get too far ahead on that, but I definitely agree. He's not like the typical old gods who have domain over forces of nature and things like that. Like, certainly his role outside of this poem is going to very much, I don't think it ever gets to the point of him having like powers that are magical in a sense that can't be symbolically mirrored by humanity. That's really broad and high level for sure, and it's entirely possible that I'll get contradicted at some point here as this comes along, because admittedly I haven't read the entire thing at the level that we usually cover all this, but no, in general, to me, Väinämöinen is really just a great example for humanity as for what is possible, and the role that he plays reflects humanity as opposed to these supernatural forces. But again, I think I'll let the examples later on kind of illustrate that.
For sure. It made me wonder if the idea of this barren land, like I was mentioning, it's sort of prehistorical. It's a time before Finland is the way that people recognize it to be. I was wondering if there might be like a real world explanation for that, where, with the Ice Age and stuff like that, where it's just a barren land, and as things start to, I guess, the Ice Age recedes and people start coming out of caves, then things start growing up.
Well, yeah, that's the theory, actually, I think, of how people started to move into Northern Europe, was that the Ice Age, the glaciers receded and vegetation would slowly start to advance north and start to grow. I mean, we still have today the line of latitude where trees won't grow above that, right? So I'm sure this was some sort of a deep memory of that sort of time, and that, the way that people would have eventually settled into these lands, that there must have been some stories of a far off time where it was barren and it was treeless, and then explaining how vegetation would have grown there. I mean, they probably wouldn't have understood directly how that would have happened. And again, we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves, but still, it's like this is a barren place, a barren island. And that's another thing. I think geologically, some of this stuff, the areas of the Baltic Sea were also quite different. I don't know if I think at one point, first of all, the Baltic Sea was filled in. That was like a full land thing at some point, but I think it also created areas of essentially what would have been islands and stuff. I'm not an expert in any of that, but still, that was an interesting point there too.
Definitely. Yeah, I always like trying to sort of figure out if there is like a geological, I don't know, similarity between like what's happened and what we can tell now and the stories that we're reading, because often there is, and that kind of blows your mind that the things they're describing that have, when they were singing this, they wouldn't have known about the Ice Age and all that kind of stuff, but they would have had an idea that a long, long time ago, way before they were around and their grandfathers were around and all that kind of stuff, that it was barren and there were these conditions. And it's kind of become, it has become mythology, even though it actually happened. And I wonder a lot of the time too, if that's sort of what happens with the heroes. Like, are they people that they were distilled into like the most important part of their, heroic story, and then then you have a myth out of them, and I'm not even saying that, like, I don't think that takes anything away from the sort of magical supernatural quality of myths. Like, if you can live a life that has so much greatness in it, or something happens that is so great that it actually lives on through untold generations, like, wow.
Definitely. And I'm sure this mention of this barren land is that concept of something that was so deep in the memory, but it would have been for sure important to remember that, like, closer to the time, speculation obviously, but I'm sure that there was something like even the possibility of going back to that, like they wouldn't have understood the processes of what was happening, right, with the Ice Age and the recession of the Ice Age. And so remembering that in myth for sure, but then again, like the heroes. And I mean, what would have gone into Väinämöinen as a character, right? It could have been so many different sources, and the way he operates in this poem is really interesting. And I think maybe we should move on and just,
I think so too.
Yeah, get more into the story here. So yeah, back to the poem. This will be another, again, we're going line by line. Here's how we kind of mark this. And in our copy, they've got the line numbers next to us here. So this is going to be lines 13 to 42. Back to the poem. Pellerwoinen, earth begotten, Sampsa, youth of smallest stature, came to sow the barren country, thickly scattering seeds around him. Down he stooped the seeds to scatter on the land and in the marshes, both in flat and sandy regions and in hard and rocky places. On the hills he sowed the pine trees, on the knolls he sowed the fir trees, and in sandy places heather, leafy saplings in the valleys. In the dales he sowed the birch trees, in the loose earth sowed the alders, where the ground was damp with cherries, likewise in the marshes, sallows. Rowan trees in holy places, willows in the fenny regions, juniper in stony districts, oaks upon the banks of rivers. Now the trees sprang up and flourished, and the saplings sprouted bravely. With their bloom the firs were loaded, and the pines their boughs extended. In the dales the birch was sprouting, in the loose earth rose the alders, where the ground was damp with cherries, juniper in stony districts, loaded with its lovely berries, and the cherries likewise fruited.
So this is an interesting bit. I'll start with Pellerwoinen. The name that I was able to find for him, or the translation of it, is basically something like plowman. And when you read the rest of the section, I mean, it's clear that this is sort of the birth of agriculture, or at least the precursor to agriculture. It's the life returning to the barren land, or at least coming through the barren land, and the idea of like prosperity and plenty. All of these plants are growing and flourishing, and there's delicious things like cherries, and there's juniper and all these wonderful things that it's a really good time, and it's a real distinct, or it's very distinct from the barren land that Väinämöinen came to. So I guess I just really see how a bit of agriculture, with the plowing. I'm not sure that this is to say that this is exactly when people began plowing or even began the agriculture, but there started to be some idea of agriculture that, maybe you can collect these berries, and sort of the gathering part of the hunter-gathering.
Yeah, I actually think I take a slightly different view of this section in that it's not necessarily agriculture here, but it's the natural sowing of the things that would have been in place prior to agriculture, like the land that they would have inhabited that would have been prosperous and had these things to gather. So I don't think we're far off. Certainly agriculture proper is in a different section here.
Definitely, yes.
But here with Pellerwoinen, I think it's him sowing the natural vegetation that would just be there as nature grows, and as like in that regard, he turns into like a proper fertility god, and he's got other stories, other poems that didn't make it into the Kalevala, and his name. So plowman is I think pretty close. But his name literally comes from the word for field, pelto.
Oh.
So Pellerwoinen, sort of, like man of the field, something like that, or plowman, I think is not a stretch at all, and it might have been like the correct connotation there. But he is definitely a god of the field, and I think what he's doing here is he's sowing the initial seeds of the landscape and the vegetation that's going to be the natural environment for these people post, the migration north, right? So that's my view of Pellerwoinen, and I think there's a few different implications there, but I don't think we're far off in our interpretation.
No, actually, that definitely makes a lot of sense. It would, especially for a culture that had developed agriculture and was hearing these stories. I could see how the question would come. Well, who planted it before we did? And that would be Pellerwoinen. Yeah, no, I totally see that. Just one thing I wanted to add. There's a mention of Sampsa. And I believe there is a connection. Is it the Sampo? And in the, in the collection of the Kalevala, Elias Lönnrot, he made a decision to mention this story before the creation of the Sampo, whereas other people who would, folk tellers or other singers of the stories, they would often tell a story of the creation of the sample before, and so you'd have this reference to it, and you would know exactly what it is. But as far as we know, we don't, if we're just reading it in order, we don't know what the sample is yet.
Right. I think it actually might have had a role in his sowing, and yeah. So there's speculation that the first name, so his full name is Sampsa Pellervoinen, is that Sampsa might have come from the biblical Samson and been related to that. At the very least, there's a somewhat direct line, and for sure, when Lönnrot was compiling all this stuff, Christianity would have been in Finland for a long time, and actually they had writing for since something like the 1500s. There was a what would you call him? I think he was a monk, Mikael Agricola, and he's a big deal in Finnish literature. He like developed the spelling system, a whole bunch of things, but he was like a Lutheran monk, similar to many of the other historians and chroniclers. I think that's a word. Such as Snorri Sturluson or the Venerable Bede. I think he's the guy who wrote the histories of England, things like that. One of them, like back in the 700s, sort of thing, yeah. Right? But so he was the same thing, but they would have had Christianity kind of infused with literature and things like that, and so it's entirely possible that a biblical figure or a biblical figure's name could have kind of been in here in this stuff, but. It's also interesting to think that his name might have something to do with the sample, and I'm not actually sure because if you have people sort of suggesting, well, maybe the name comes from Samson, something like that, I certainly will defer to more experts in that field as far as making linguistic connections, but it seems pretty plausible that his name could have come from the Sampo, and the Sampo would have been used in the creation of, in the sowing of seeds, right? And the thing about that is that the Sampo is sort of, we haven't directly covered it yet, but the Sampo is sort of this just mythical thing, this object of great power, but it's sort of not entirely clear what exactly it is. And so for it to be used in fertility, yeah, entirely possible. And the thing here that I find interesting is that this myth, it's actually against a major pattern in agricultural religious development, as noted by Mircea Eliade, where theoretically the earth was always assimilated to the mother and to the female in general. And the idea was that the discovery of the plow and plowing and sowing intentionally, that was the act of sowing the field and plowing the field was essentially made to be the same thing as the sexual act. It was symbolically sexual, and it was the sowing of Mother Earth with the seeds, and then she'll give birth to the plants. But prior to that, she is seemingly producing all this stuff on her own without having been sown, as it were. But in this myth, they have the understanding, I suppose, that even these original plants are, in fact, sown by a fertility god. And I mean, what a good explanation, right? Because, even before the creation of all of these, all of the structures that humanity would have put in place through agriculture and through the discovery of agriculture, even before that, there must have been some, in a sense, agriculture to sow these barren lands and to fill them with vegetation.
That's fascinating. That you're right. It does go against. It does go against type, that because usually it's Mother Nature just sort of doing it, and then agriculture is the masculine sort of aspect. But it's really, I guess, balanced from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's an interesting figure here, and certainly we don't really see him anywhere else in the Kalevala that I'm aware, pretty sure. But he's certainly a fertility god, and he's, based on other references to him, he's certainly a god, Pellerwoinen. But the thing is, he's not the only god of fertility out there. And I do want to just touch on that for a moment here, because we're not going to hear about this other fertility god anywhere else in the Kalevala. And well, he's got some really interesting kind of stories here. So just a little bit of a sidetrack here, but so the other god that he's comparable to, other than, first of all, Freyr in Norse mythology, very comparable in his role, and certainly the role of fertility and agriculture and all that. But there's another Finnic god called Pekko. And Pekko is, well, he's another very, very much a typical fertility god. And he's got a variety of spellings. The Finnish is Pekko, but then there's versions with just the one K. And another name for him is Pellon Pekko, which is what means Pekko of the field. And again, that's related to Pellerwoinen, and he's got the same word, pelto. That's the root word there for both of them. And Pekko, theoretically, as opposed to Pellerwoinen, he watches over the fields and is sort of a fertility god, kind of less involved, but also kind of one that you would pray to, sort of thing. And one of the reasons that we know this is that Pekko is still around today in parts of Estonia and far northwest Russia, with a group of ethnic Estonians called the Seto people, and they live mostly in what's now southeast Estonia, and then the area of Russia kind of immediately adjacent to that. They're a protected minority in Russia, and they actually want some recognition in Estonia as being slightly separate, even though their language is debatably it's a dialect of Estonian. They want to call it kind of its own language, but they revered Pekko. He was like their head god for the longest time, and actually the thing that differentiated them from the more mainstream Estonians was that the Estonians, they were converted to first Catholicism and then Lutheranism in Estonia, but then in the areas that was controlled by what was Novgorod at the time, whatever it was, like a city-state sort of thing, those lands were still pagan. And so the Seto people, the Estonians who lived within Novgorod, kept up their pagan practices and lived there for a very long time. Eventually they converted to Orthodox Christianity, but they still kept up the old festivals for a very long time. And even today, every year they choose a steward of Pekko, and they have a festival that rotates between different villages, and they still essentially practice the worship of Pekko. And the modern festival is a revival. It's not like a direct line sort of thing, but it was apparently going on till like the 18th, 19th century even. And so that's like very, very, very modern. And he was another fertility god that's kind of still around. And the character of Pellerwoinen, the god Pellerwoinen, might be maybe not the same, but certainly related to this Pekko god, who would have been a very important fertility god.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really neat. And do you know, are there still practitioners? I guess there are still practitioners that would like there's still a steward of Pekko, and
yeah, I guess the idea is that they're nominally Orthodox Christian, but they have a lot of these cultural customs that are still essentially these old ways. And this modern festival is certainly like a kind of a revival of their old culture. So I don't know if it's necessarily that they're practicing the old religion actively, but they are practicing their old cultural customs. So in a lot of ways, what's the difference?
That's true. While you were talking about that, it made me. I was trying to think of other like fertility gods that might go against type, and I don't know enough about. I think it'd be Celtic myth, but I was thinking of the one. I think it's like the Green Man, and just sort of this idea of there needs to be sort of a masculine counterpart to Mother Earth to actually get stuff to grow. So it's definitely that's like a very interesting understanding of the world and archetype. Like I think it actually shows kind of a development of an understanding of how the world works, because like we did start off with even the Kalevala, it's basically just female entities. There's we're gonna see her soon, Luanator, right? Yeah. And then a teal, but a female duck that lays eggs. So it's not until later on that we start getting the masculine influence and sort of that understanding that you need both to create life.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's this would be a really, really old part of their religion and their understanding of the world. I mean, this would have come in through the discovery of agriculture. And even though we're not precisely there yet, their understanding, I guess a good way to put it might be that they backfilled the belief to prior to their discovery of it, because that is when the cycle of the earth and the cycle of vegetation would have become apparent. And that's the source of all of these fertility gods and these fertility rites and these fertility myths. It's super old. And I mean, that's the biggest single reason to put all this stuff so early, to put this poem so early, all the details of it, because it's really, really deep mythology. It's right up there with the cosmogonic myth, which is the first rune, is the creation of the world on a cosmic sense, and now we're getting into kind of the fertility of it, which is another extremely old idea.
Definitely, it's kind of I know in Christianity there's, or at least in Western thought, there's sort of the idea of the prime mover, the first entity that did something. I'm kind of looking at this, seeing as this like the prime farmer, this is the cosmic farmer, I guess. I'm sure we could make a t-shirt out of that or something.
That's really funny. That's not a bad way to put it at all, though.
Yeah.
Like, certainly the archetypal example of the farmer and sort of the precursor again, because this is like just the really natural stuff. But yeah, certainly lots to say here, but you ready to move on?
I am.
Okay. So this is going to be another few lines here. We're going, what is this? Lines 43 to 58. Yeah. Okay, back to the poem. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, came to view the work in progress, where the land was sown by Sampsa, and where Pellerwoinen labored. While he saw the trees had flourished, and the saplings sprouted bravely, yet had Jumala's tree, the oak tree, not struck down its root and sprouted. Therefore to its fate he left it to enjoy its freedom, and he waited 3 nights longer, and as many days he waited. Then he went and gazed around him, when the week was quite completed, yet had Jumala's tree, the oak tree, not struck down its root and sprouted.
So this, I had to think about this for a long time. I went, there's a whole bunch of areas that I went with the symbolism, some probably, more accurate than others, but it was certainly interesting. And as we go on, it became not more obscure, but just like, for me, some of the ideas that I had some were supported quite well, some not so much and fell away, but it was, it became, one, it was fun to try and sort it out, but it definitely, this was like one that I had to really wrestle with. So I'll start off with Jumala, the name, that's basically God. And from what I understand, it's almost the idea, the Judeo-Christian idea of God. And so what could be Jumala's tree, the oak tree? I mean, we've already talked about oak trees upon the banks of the rivers, and they seem to be growing fine, but why is this particular oak tree having a hard time taking root? And so I was thinking that on sort of one hand, it's Mother Nature. It's still unknown. So, well, this was my first thought. It's Mother Nature. It's still unknown, but that wasn't really going anywhere for me. And then as I was reading it, it almost struck me that the oak tree might actually be some symbol or sense of humans, and moving from hunting and gathering to agriculture and setting up like a stable society where they don't have to keep moving around and that kind of thing. And I think I see that play out throughout this Runo, where it goes from a hunting gathering society into a stable agricultural one, and we're kind of seeing like they're kind of trying to get humans to settle down and work at it, but it's not taking, and we haven't quite figured it out yet how to grow our own things and not be at the mercy of nature, and instead of I guess not be at the mercy of nature rather than living with it and sort of figuring out how to work with it.
I didn't go there at all. That's a great point. Yeah. So first of all, just everything about Jumala, that was right on. it's that being though the symbol for human habitation. That's really interesting, especially with what's going to come later. No spoilers, but yeah, it's really. I certainly went to this. This is like a big kind of prime tree, which was one of those ideas that is developed through the same fertility cycle and everything like that. The idea of a cosmic world tree, like we have Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, but it was there in many other cultures. They had kind of that example where the tree becomes the symbol for the entire world, sort of thing. And so, I mean, I was going there on some level, but no, you that's I think an idea that fits much better here, and that's a really great idea. The only other thing I'll mention here is that, first of all, Jumala was originally more of a generic term because first of all, it's found in the vast majority of other Uralic languages, which Finnish is one of, especially just the Finnic languages in general. There's a similar example in Estonian, and there's definitely examples in Mari, which is a language in Russia. And one of the other major examples of Finnic language that's kind of still around, sort of thing. But the idea is that he would have been kind of an ancient sky god, and and his name was kind of generically God as well. That is like a direct parallel to Zeus or Tyr, and they were originally sky god. Zeus kind of always was. Tyr sort of would have been, got supplanted by Thor for the most part in the sky god role, but ultimately he was a pagan figure prior to Christianity, but the word for God in Finnish became Jumala. And here, so I mean, if this is in the context here of the sky god's tree, or even just God's tree in general, maybe that comes to the idea of how sacred places in old cultures were centered around, well, a specific spot. Like towns were built around sacred places. I'm liking your idea. I think that really, really fits here.
I don't know, because later on I'll talk about how I'd gone on this wild like goose chase, and I'm definitely going to talk about it, how it was actually like a volcano, but we'll get to that.
Oh, good. Only other point I've got here is that he sort of he leaves the land to its own fate. He doesn't intervene with it at all, and I think this parallels how maybe humanity just wasn't intervening and or didn't understand to intervene, something like that. That's kind of where I am with it here. He's leaving the land, nature, kind of to its own devices, for better or worse. And I think, do you want to move on?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
It's just getting good.
Yeah. All right. So this one here, we're going from about 59 to 66. That's what it looks like. Yep. Quick one. Then he saw 4 lovely maidens, 5 like brides from water rising, and they mowed the grassy meadow. Down they cut the dewy herbage. On the cloud-encompassed headland, on the peaceful island's summit, what they mowed they raked together, and in heaps the hay collected.
So I found this one puzzling as well because, well, for a number of reasons. There's, 4 lovely maidens, and then 5 like brides. I have absolutely no idea what the numbers mean, and I actually I should probably read more about the symbolism of different numbers. But then you can get into like all the numerology and horoscopes and stuff, and that's not necessarily all that helpful. But it looks to me like the idea of maidens and brides, it's almost like you've got in the maidens this, I guess, unrealized potential for fertility, that they are fertile, but they don't have sort of the masculine part that's necessary for, I guess, fertilization. And then but with brides, I mean, if you're a bride, you're married, you've got that other part, so that's more like realized potential. And then as far as mowing the grassy meadow and cutting the dewy herbage and things like that, it almost strikes me as not even agriculture, but maybe just clearing a spot to live and grow and, you know, have all the things that, like, you're basically settling down. You're clearing a spot to settle down. And that's sort of where I went with that.
Yeah. I went in a similar direction for sure. The idea of these maidens. So first of all, they the numbering thing. I don't have any kind of deeper knowledge on that, but it's certainly a poetic pattern that you'll have one number followed by its next successive number. Here is just repeated like tons. So I think that's for sure. If nothing else, it's like just a poetic flourish to show there's 4. Oh wait, there's 5, something like that.
For sure.
But you know, they're rising from the water, which, you know, I wish I had more to it than this, but you know, they're coming out from the unknown. They're coming from the symbolic unknown. So wherever they came from, it's unknown, but it's also the idea of potential, right? And they're doing something new. And I think that's the kind of the key here and where this fits with what we've just read. So Väinämöinen is leaving this oak tree alone at the moment here. But now these women are doing something. It's not like they're practicing agriculture, like you said, but they're certainly doing something. They're engaging with the land, with nature, and they're actually doing something. And I like the idea of clearing a spot. I also relate this to the idea that they were kind of the original gatherers, and maybe this was kind of their process, like gather up the useful things, but then anything that kind of wasn't usable or whatever, maybe they rake it up for some hay. This could relate to animal husbandry at that time. Like maybe they kept animals in their nomadic existence a little bit. I don't know specifics on that. We certainly do have archaeological record of animals during the period when agriculture was getting started, but I don't know if we have evidence of kind of before that, whether they had some kind of semi-domestic animals or whatnot. But they mention hay. It's possible, I think, that it could be kind of related to that. But one idea that I really like here is that women, supposedly, according to Eliade again, would have been the original people responsible for agriculture, because the men would have been off hunting, doing what the men were generally always doing up to that point. They would have been off hunting sort of thing, but they were the keepers of the home, and the home would have included this agriculture, especially early on when it must have been like not so much experimental, but certainly not as understood and systematized as what would later become like kind of proper agriculture as we know it. Which by the way, like even in a primitive state, like it was well organized for a very long time. Like it would have been primitive by today's standards, obviously, but it would have been well organized and understood how to do it. And well, the whole tribe really would have, if not directly participated in the farming, they would have indirectly participated in it. Hunters became less important. It became more about agriculture specifically. And so on this one, the idea as women originally being responsible for it is sort of a two-pronged thing, because it's them as, first of all, the ones that are kind of there in the home area taking care of that stuff, but also because women are the ones who understand the mysteries of creation. And this is the whole idea of femininity as chaos, the feminine symbol of chaos. It's because they understand these mysteries. It's literally a part of their bodies. And so they're the ones who understand the mystery of creation from Mother Earth. And so them being responsible for that was sort of a natural thing early on, especially when it would have been kind of like a mystical thing, almost like you prepare the land somehow, and then here's some crops suddenly. Certainly in this situation, it sounds like maybe they prepare the land somehow, and maybe they're lucky to get some edible crops from it. Like maybe they're clearing it so new things can grow or something like that, but not with the intentionality or whatever of sowing and plowing and all that yet.
No, for sure. And I'm just saying about like clearing land. It might have even just to have had a better view of what's around them, so that something isn't sneaking up on them and killing and eating them. And I like that you went back to the idea of from the water rising. I remember for some reason in this particular poem, I had a hard time remembering that that water was just the unknown in general and not literally the water, because it does play such a huge role in the Kalevala water. And yeah, so I just remember like thinking like, well, coming from water, like how does that work? And then like, oh, wait a second, it's the general unknown. Yeah. So yeah. Other than that, I'm probably ready to keep going.
Sounds good. Okay, this will be 67 to 72. Just one little paragraph here. Back to the poem. From the ocean rose up Tursas. From the waves arose the hero. And the heaps of hay he kindled, and the flames arose in fury. All was soon consumed to ashes, till the sparks were quite extinguished.
So this one's interesting. I'll start with Tursas. So his name kind of translates into malevolent sea creature or sea monster, and I mean that could be anything from like we talk about krakens or whatever, but it's this idea of the and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's actually like one of the big, I don't want to say like bad guys in the Kalevala, but he's sort of this, he's definitely a figure that when he comes along, there's chaos or something coming along with him. And I find it very interesting that he's called a hero here, but I'll get into that in just a second. The other interesting thing about his name is that it is likely related to the Norse word Tursas, which is giant. So it's I feel pretty comfortable in thinking of like the giants in Norse mythology in the same way as Tursas, just this being of the unknown who's going to bring chaos and sort of who knows what's going to happen.
Right, definitely, and the relation to Tursas for sure puts it in my mind as something like a monster from the unknown. There's another interpretation that he could have been a war god. This was very specifically mentioned by Agricola again, like I was talking about the founder of Finnish literature back in the 1500s. But no, I mean he's associated with water. His name was apparently an old name for walrus, actually, which is kind of funny. I mean, yeah, like that's sort of a sea monster type thing, right? But and then again, the relation here to the word for giant in the Norse, there's certainly a lot of cross contact for sure, but it's not that particular link looks fairly clear. He's certainly got more of an impact than just being kind of a monstrous thing. There's a symbol called the Tursansudan, the heart of Tursas, which was sort of like it was almost like of course in audio form this is hard, but it was like 4 squares kind of all together, and it was like a rotating hammer is actually what that was speculated to be. And so it's not like this figure is exactly one-dimensional here as far as being just a sea monster or something like that. And maybe he did eventually become some kind of a war god for like from whatever purpose. But in this stanza, for sure, rising from the ocean, that's also relatively clear. I mean, we were just talking about that, rising from the unknown for sure, but maybe more directly rising from chaos in this particular case. But no, in his role as a character, super interesting.
Definitely. And then with what he does in kindling everything and burning it, that to me is lightning. It's just like lightning strikes and then there's a forest fire. And that's incredibly common. And it's something they would have had to deal with, probably multiple times, like during the summer, where lightning strikes and it sets something on fire, and it sort of does or does not sort of catch and spread like crazy. And what we'll see is sort of what we know about the aftermath of forest fires is that there's an incredible burst of new growth after forest fires, and there are things that don't grow unless the seeds are exposed to high temperatures that you'd only find in a fire. So it's actually very interesting that there are actual adaptations in nature to forest fires, and so I think that's what we're going to see as we go on. That, and probably why in this case he's seen as a hero is that yes, he brought fire and burned everything, but something great was able to grow out of it.
Right, exactly. And again, it's sort of the idea how chaos is not this one-dimensional thing. It's got this possibility for creation, and it's really that the unknown comes into play, does something unexpected, but what you do from that is, kind of up to you. And in this case, I mean, it certainly seems like possibly destroying something that was worked towards, but then sets it on fire. It goes into a heap of ashes. Well, that could be seen as negative, but again, as you're saying, not to get ahead of ourselves, we almost might as well just go ahead here. But then it's that there is going to be additional potential for having interacted with Tursas. So, do you want to move on to the next?
Yeah, let's go on.
Sounds good. Okay, 73 to 88. Back to the poem. Then among the heaps of ashes, in the dryness of the ashes, there a tender germ he planted, tender germ of oak and acorn, whence the beauteous plant sprang upward, and the sapling grew and flourished. As from earth a strawberry rises, and it forked in both directions. Then the branches wide extended, and the leaves were thickly scattered, and the summit rose to heaven, and its leaves in air expanded. In their course the clouds it hindered, and the driving clouds impeded, and it hid the shining sunlight, and the gleaming of the moonlight.
So, my first, like the very first thing I thought of when I read this was that it could be talking about a volcano, because of the one. There are a lot of things in Norse mythology that it's speculated that it's referring to a volcanic eruption. So I probably had volcanoes on the mind. But when you read about, something from the earth, as a strawberry rises, well, that's red, right? And that sort of was my thinking, right? The leaves were thickly scattered. The summit rose to heaven, and its leaves and air expanded, and then it like blocked out the sun and the moon and everything. I was just like, could that be like the smoke? And that would look like a tree, right? Or at least the leaves of a tree. And this again, speculation. This is just me like talking out loud to think about it. But so I'm probably way off. And the more research I did, we were talking about the geological sort of similarities. I was able to find information on volcanoes in Finland from like 2.3 million years ago. So, and like that's when they finished erupting. So after reading that, I was like, oh, so it's probably not a volcano. But I did like actually like a lot of research into it to try and figure out if this would work. And I don't think it works perfectly at all. But I did think it was sort of an interesting rabbit hole for me to go down. One of the interesting things I found, and it's not really related to the Kalevala, but I found an article about the the volcano that erupted in Finland like 5 years ago, and then you realize that the journalist who wrote about it in, I can't remember which paper it was, but it's like a well-known one, just got Finland and Iceland mixed up, and it it was pretty funny reading that. I'm like, okay, so, and no one's fact checked this at all. Like, yeah, so, and they haven't fixed it because it was years ago. But yeah, so I thought that was pretty funny. But I was also like, oh yeah, there's volcanoes in Finland. I read, I'm like, oh, like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about at all.
That's pretty funny.
But what I'm seeing, it's hard because my I guess second idea about it being possibly like humanity being sort of planting themselves in the ground, it might still work, but it's hard to think of like the humans back then who have just sort of figured out how to do this kind of thing, or like settle as causing this much commotion and damage and having to deal with it. But I do think there's something very interesting about this idea that it's kind of like nature has gone out of control. And I wonder if maybe it's this idea that humans weren't flourishing, and that they weren't able to, they were having a harder time competing with everything that was sort of better suited to the environment. And I know that, like, as humans, we're terribly suited to every environment that we're in. We're incredibly fragile creatures. Like, we don't run all that fast. We can run for a long time, but not quickly. And then, like, our skin burns in the sun and all this kind of stuff, and we get sick all the time. And our skin's actually quite fragile. Like, we bleed all the time. But so animals in general are much better suited to living it. And the only thing we have is actually the ability to sort of create culture and learn skills like agriculture and use tools that, you know, for hunting and that kind of thing. So that's sort of the direction I went in after my volcano dreams were shattered.
Funny. That's that direction is much more where I went. But on the volcano thing, so I don't know if the Ural mountain range, the Ural mountain range in Russia was volcanic or not. I would have to look that up, but that is theoretically the original homeland of the Finnic peoples, is the area around the Ural Mountains, and then they would have migrated westward, and they really actually supposedly had the area from the Ural Mountains all the way through to what is now Finland, and even far south, like what we would consider Russia, was Uralic speaking. But then eventually the Slavs kind of moved in and took over. But they were like wide ranging.
That's a vast amount of land, and especially for like the time period that we're talking, that is huge.
Oh yeah, but we're not talking like an empire or anything. We're talking like just little tribes, right?
For sure.
So it's interesting how they lost out to the civilizations that were developing a little more quickly, sort of thing. But they certainly had their own kind of homeland thing, and again, the Hungarians are kind of what mess up my understanding of some of this. But at one point, eventually, I guess a group of people, Uralic speaking, would have essentially merged with a Turkic speaking group, and that became the Hungarians and the Magyars and the Huns, something like that. The Huns aren't related linguistically to the Hungarians, and certainly not to Finns, but culturally they shared a lot of things supposedly. But either way, they would have had the same general homeland, which was the Ural Mountains originally, and then they moved west. So possible. I don't know if the Ural mountain range is volcanic or not. I didn't think it was, but could be one of those really, really old memories again there. But I do also like the idea of how this is like the growing of nature, and possibly to me, this is almost like the idea of humanity is experimenting with, okay, so you plant some stuff in this new fertile land. Like it says, who does this among the heap of ashes. Then there a tender germ he planted. I don't know if that's supposed to be Tursas or that's supposed to be Väinämöinen. I would actually guess Väinämöinen, sort of, because of how he would generally be referenced as the protagonist here usually, but Tursas is the previous character mentioned. I would still guess Väinämöinen for the role, like he goes and takes an acorn and plants it, sort of thing. And maybe to the extent of they plant some things that aren't naturally supposed to be there, and it goes and overtakes the rest of the forest, like an invasive species sort of thing. This actually reminded me, I was reading something about how most of the CO2 that we trap is in like something like the 10% largest trees, something like that. It's definitely a natural example of the Pareto principle. Like the largest trees spread out so much more, and they take in so much more sunlight that they just overtake the rest of the forest. Really, it's the largest ones that have the most success, and to me that's something like this, possibly.
For sure. Actually, it made me think too of two things. One, the rainforest in like the Amazon, where you go and most of the life is actually like on the canopy or above, because on the ground nothing, like there's no light getting through really. What there is, it's not like nighttime or anything, but there's not enough for plants to really flourish. And you can see that also in forests that aren't tropical, like in Finland or like in Canada and BC. There's a lot of forest, like coniferous forests, where there's not that much on the ground. There'd be like ferns, but that's about it. It also reminded me of in the 1800s, I think, 1800s, there was this new science of scientific forestry, and they would try, and it was pretty popular in like Britain and Germany, or at least what was Germany, the precursor to, I guess. But the idea was you could scientifically plant a perfect forest. And so what happened was, and if you see pictures of it, it's kind of bizarre, because you actually see these trees perfectly lined up in grid formation with the equidistant between each other, and it's bizarre because it's unnatural. Like you look at it and it's just not how trees grow. But the trees kept dying and stuff like that because they weren't, and they couldn't figure out why until they went to the forest and started looking at the ecosystems and planting everything around. Sort of trees actually need certain plants growing around them to grow up, and they actually eventually, if they grow big enough, they actually kill off the plants around them, and because there's not enough sunlight getting around the nutrients and all that kind of stuff. But it was just funny how like we tried to finagle with that, and we couldn't until we mimicked just what was going on in nature.
Right. That fits perfectly here, I think. Something like trying to take control over that. And you know what? We go back to some of the ideas from previously where it's like the maidens are clearing an area possibly to make a settlement. What if this is something like they keep building a settlement, but nature keeps encroaching on it to the point where they get like not just grasses and stuff, but an oak tree grows up right in the middle of their town or something like that. And now it fully covers everything and they can't do anything about it.
Now that's interesting. And especially if you look at the materials that they were collecting, it wouldn't really withstand the environment for very long. So that, yeah, I could definitely see that. That actually like helps. It's definitely an interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm still getting my head around it, but I think it's something in that direction where it's like nature is still encroaching on the ordered spaces that humans are developing, something like that. And they can't really do much about it at this point.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that actually, that makes things click for me. That, because before it's I would say it's complicated, or at least it's a little, not vague, but just there's a lot going on, and there's not a lot of places to like grab onto and sort of tease it apart and see what could this mean. But no, I think you're on the right path.
Cool. And I'm relying on a couple of things that are going to come up right away here. So
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Back to the poem. Lines 89 to 100. Then the aged Väinämöinen pondered deeply and reflected. Is there none to fell the oak tree and o'erthrow the tree majestic? Sad is now the life of mortals, and for fish to swim is dismal, since the air is void of sunlight and the gleaming of the moonlight. But they could not find a hero, nowhere find a man so mighty, who could fell the giant oak tree with its 100 spreading branches.
So we kind of see the plight of, I'd say, of mere mortals in nature, that, and not even just for humans, but for animals as well, and I'd say plants too, that nature's always trying to kill you. And it doesn't matter if you're a fish or a human, it's still trying to kill you. And, you know, as humans, we've actually been able to, I guess, subdue nature's ability to kill us to some extent, but, you know, we're still fragile creatures. Like, it's not a sure thing by any stretch. I mean, you still hear about, you know, if there are bears where you live, you still have bear warnings because they're going to kill you. Like, it's, you know, this isn't a rare occurrence. It's a very common one. And then, you know, with the fish, it's, of course, you know, the big fish eats little fish. It's always going on. So there's just that constant struggle of life. And I think it was like Thomas Hobbes who called it like the war of all against all. And yeah, that's sort of what I'm seeing here. And Väinämöinen sort of crying out who's going to sort of even the odds for people. Yeah,
I think we've kind of already somewhat covered this a little bit. Yeah, I agree. It's something like humanity doesn't necessarily have the capability to intervene in these natural processes, and I mean, maybe it's also implied that they had something to do with this kind of overtaking it. So maybe getting into things a little bit before they had the ability to deal with them, you know. But yeah, in this case, though, I think this is a lot of finding a hero to be able to fell this. I mean, they were talking about this tree like it's God's tree. Having to take that down, that must have been like a kind of a serious consideration. It must have been something that was so catastrophic to their ability to live that it must have been like, well, finding a hero was necessary, right? So there's a lot of things here that this sort of take away from this to be kind of world tree symbolism. I don't think that's actually what's happening here, but I think it is kind of an explanation of nature taking over and sort of forcibly taking over despite best efforts to kind of avoid that, and humanity not being able to handle that yet. Väinämöinen certainly can't handle that yet. So
for sure. And actually, I read a bit of, and it was a very small bit of Iliad that talked about world trees and how there was an idea that, I'm just trying to remember. So you have the world tree and it's the cosmos, right? And it's sort of everything in it, including humans. And then if mythologically, if you have to cut it down, it's sort of you, not removing yourself, but stepping outside so that instead of being subject to nature, which we are still, but you were then able to manipulate it as well. And it's sort of, you're kind of stepping out of the animal part and becoming more human because now you can interact with it and control it. So I don't know, just a little, for me, it gave me, I think, a bit of a useful insight that, okay, maybe this is, again, humans, we're at a point where we haven't taken control of our environment yet, but we're trying to, and we're struggling to.
Yeah, I think this is all pointing in kind of the same direction here. Shall we move on?
Yes.
101 to 110. Back to the poem. Then the aged Väinämöinen spoke the very words which follow. Noble mother, who hast borne me, luonnotar, who me hast nurtured, send me powers from out the ocean, numerous are the powers of the ocean, so that they may fell the oak tree and destroy the tree so baneful, that the sun may shine upon us and the pleasant moonlight glimmer.
So this is really neat, I think, because we've got Väinämöinen appealing to the unknown in its like most pure form, that sort of crying out that there's got to be a way to deal with this, and we don't know how though. So like, how are we going to figure this out? There's got to be literally like a divine inspiration for it, that something is going to just sort of reach in and, you know, point it out and show the direction, and you know, give the humans a fighting chance against nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't want to appear like this is what he's doing, but he's appealing to his mother, which is like the at this point, like the highest representation of the person who's responsible for creation. I do not want to imply that he's like crying to mummy to fix it or something like that. That's certainly not the tone here. And just to be clear, luonnotar, that's another name for ilmatar. Ilma is the word for the air, and in an older sense it was heaven, which she came down from heaven and descended. But then luonto, that's nature, essentially. So lady of nature is kind of a new term for her. So maybe she's got a kind of a new role now that there is the world, that there is now an ordered space of land, and it's not just water or something like that. But it is another name for Ilmatar. So it's not like it's a new character he's appealing to or something like that. But yeah, again, so I mean, this is just another prayer and asking for something out of the ocean. I mean, that again is like directly out of the unknown. Numerous are the powers of ocean. Like, I mean, that's a great understanding of how, well, symbolically of chaos having the potential for creation and to bring in something new, right? So definitely a good relationship with chaos and the unknown here.
Absolutely. With his prayer, and I think this is in general what prayer is. I haven't thought about it a lot, but I think prayer is this idea of like realigning yourself with the highest good that you can imagine. And right now, the highest good that he can imagine is finding something that is right now unknown and coming to know it and being able to use it, which is basically exactly what we're all supposed to do, is to go into the unknown and find useful things there that we can, you know, assimilate into our lives and make known. And then he's crying out to you know, his mother, the lady of nature, basically Mother Nature. So he's like, it doesn't get more archetypally clear than this. It's you know, Lönnrot is very much like hitting us in the face with it, that, you know, he's going into the unknown to get the tool that's going to help him. Of course, that's exactly how it works.
Yeah, and it's right on, and I mean, you know, you credit Lönnrot, but for sure he was in a lot of ways he was like the compiler here. So I'm sure this is like something that was sung and said, and I mean, this being a description of how this is all going to happen, and I think that's a great segue to what's going to come next.
Yes.
Okay. Back to the poem. Lines 111 to 124. Then a man arose from ocean. From the waves a hero started. Not the hugest of the hugest, nor the smallest of the smallest. As a man's thumb was his stature, lofty as the span of woman. Decked his head a helm of copper. On his feet were boots of copper. On his hands were copper gauntlets, gloves adorned with copper tracings. Round his waist his belt was copper. In his belt his axe was copper, and the haft thereof was thumb long, and the blade thereof was nail long.
So this is very interesting. It just sort of on the face value of it. So you've prayed to your mother, and then this like thumb-sized guy comes, all decked out in copper, and it's just like really, like, this is what's going to save us? Like, come on. But what I actually see here is possibly the dawning of the Copper Age, and the knowledge of tools and all the things that came with it. And the Copper Age, I think I've got like the Latin word written down somewhere, something like Paleolithic Age. And it was, when it was first discovered, it was sort of this, it was originally thought that it was just sort of this small period in the Neolithic Age, that it was just sort of a small jump before we got into like the next ages kind of thing. And it was a blip on the radar, but then they kept making more discoveries and finding that it wasn't just a small blip on the way to the Bronze Age. It was actually like this pretty significant moment where like life changed, because you could, as they found more Copper Age sites, they were finding that there were now distinctions between like the ruling class and the ruled class, and the rich and the poor, because now you had this metal that you could fashion into items. And some of those items, like being like all the things they talk about, axes and armor, absolutely, these were items that they made out of copper for a long time. And the beauty of copper is that you don't need to heat it to form it. It's soft enough that you can bend it, but it's also, I guess, hard enough. Like, if you're going to make an axe or a weapon out of it, you're still going to kill someone with it. It's not going to, mush against someone. So it's this really, it's a very useful metal, especially for people who don't have any knowledge of like blacksmithing and smelting, that it's something harder than stone that they can use to, interact with the world.
Certainly something more shapeable than stone, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And no, I mean, what is this if not kind of the genesis of this age? And the way they describe it here is that, it's from the ocean, from the unknown, because how else would you really describe a discovery like that? Like this would have been a revelation overnight, essentially. Once someone, first of all, finds this stuff and then figures out that it's actually useful. I mean, that would have taken experimentation. This would have been just like a sudden overnight revelation.
Yeah, it would have been crazy. Like, it would have changed your life, like with a snap of a finger kind of thing. And I wonder how they found it. Was it in the ground and someone saw it and it was shiny and they're like, oh, this is kind of neat. Let's dig it out. Or, was someone running and then they tripped and fell and like cut themselves on it, and it was like, oh geez, this is sharper than the stone I'm using, like, things like that. Like, where was it gathering water, like rainwater, and they're like, oh, this is a pretty good cup, like. And that's like only a handful of ideas of how they could have done it. It could have been any number of ways.
Oh yeah, it would have been organic. It would have been just like something out of the unknown for sure. And I mean, so you get this guy here, and his stature in this case, I don't know, maybe it's something like the tools still, you still look like a man. Calling him like extraordinarily small, something like that. I think I don't know. It's certainly something that I don't think. Well, it's not the size of something that could take down a tree, right? It's someone unassuming, someone that's not. They make the point of saying that he's smaller than an average person, the size of a thumb, but at a very minimum, I think it says something like maybe these tools don't make you any larger than you are, at first glance, something like that.
Or even that just discovering the copper, like it's there's a progression of knowledge that you've only got like a thumb full of knowledge about this metal, but wait, as you learn and grow with it, look at the things you're going to be able to do.
I like it. And we're certainly going to get a little more into this coming up, so I think we'll just move on.
Yes, let's move on.
Okay. All the way to line 148, 125 to 148 here. Back to the poem. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, deeply pondered and reflected. While he seems a man in semblance and a hero in appearance, yet his height is but a thumb length, scarce as lofty as an ox hoof. Then he spoke the words which follow and expressed himself in this wise. Who are you, my little fellow, most contemptible of heroes? Than a dead man scarcely stronger, and your beauty all has vanished. Then the puny man from ocean, hero of the floods, made answer. I'm a man as you behold me, small but mighty water hero. I have come to fell the oak tree, and to splinter it to fragments. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, answered in the words which follow. You have hardly been created, neither made nor so proportioned as to fell this mighty oak tree, overthrow the tree stupendous.
Well, I think what we're seeing is I'd say the proper reaction to anything new and novel is that it's like disbelief that it's going to do anything until it proves itself. And I know that was a huge thing in ancient Rome, actually, that they detested novelty because it was new and hadn't been proven. They loved the tried and true methods, which is definitely something that that goes after my own heart. That's something that I like. While I do enjoy novelty, give me the things that have worked, and maybe we can work with that. It's always a case of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Yeah. So we have Väinämöinen seeing this and just kind of questioning its use and wondering if it's actually going to be useful. And it's anytime we've got just novelty. It's like prove yourself before we adopt it completely and run with it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he certainly doesn't think that this little man can cut down this giant tree. It's like, you really? And what do you got? This stuff? Like, what are you going to do with this stuff? That tree's huge. That tree's massive. And then this little guy is all like, yep, I'm going to go cut the tree down. So, I mean, I really don't have a lot more to say about it, but I think you're right where it's like it's this unproven technology sort of thing. And it really is a lesson where it's like, okay, so you have the one side that's not pushing against change, but it at least is skeptical of change. That certainly these days would be kind of the conservative side of things. And then you have people trying to make change just in general, and that's sort of the more liberal side of things today, left, something like that. But maybe not to be political or anything, that's just like conservative in nature and open in nature, where it's like you naturally gravitate to more of the things that are tried and true versus going and experimenting and being in the unknown, being in the edge of the unknown and being creative sort of thing. A lot of creative things are garbage. A lot of creative things are not going to work out, but we still need them to try to do it because that's the only way that anything new is developed. I hesitate to say progress necessarily, but in terms of human advancement, where it's like a new technology is created or a new idea gets brought up sort of thing, it's certainly something that can be worth considering and worth trying. And that's what this little guy here is kind of doing. So it's that interplay between Väinämöinen, who certainly comes across as very much of a father archetype in general, hero. He's old, something like that, versus this new hero from the unknown, roughly, from the water, who is going to do something new. So it's that interplay, and my point is I think we generally need both regardless, and that's kind of how the world regulates itself. Again, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you still bring in new ideas to avoid stagnation, which in this case it seems like they've stagnated. They've hit the limit of their ability to grow as a society because nature continues to encroach on them, something like that.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought of the stagnation, but that's exactly what's going on. Yeah, and so we have this new pint-sized hero, with this newfangled, technology. Maybe he can help them out.
Maybe he can. Let's see. Okay, we're gonna go all the way to line 190. So this will be 149 to 190. Back to the poem. Scarcely had the words been spoken, while his gaze was fixed upon him, when the man transformed before him and became a mighty hero. While his feet the earth were stamping, to the clouds his head he lifted, to his knees his beard was flowing, to his spurs his locks descended. Fathom wide his eyes were parted, fathom wide his trousers measured. Round his knee the girth was greater, and around his hip 'twas doubled. Then he sharpened keen the axe blade, brought the polished blade to sharpness. 6 the stones on which he ground it, 7 the stones on which he whet it. Then the man stepped forward lightly, hastened on to do his mission. Wide his trousers, and they fluttered, round his legs as onward strode he. And the first step taken brought him to the shore so soft and sandy. With the second stride he landed on the dun ground further inland. And the third step brought him quickly where the oak itself was rooted. With his axe he smote the oak tree, with his sharpened blade he hewed it. Once he smote it, twice he smote it, and the third stroke wholly cleft it. From the axe the flame was flashing, flame was bursting from the oak tree, as he strove to fell the oak tree, overthrow the tree stupendous. Thus the third blow was delivered, and the oak tree fell before him. For the mighty tree was shattered, and the 100 boughs had fallen, and the trunk extended eastward, and the summit to the northwest, and the leaves were scattered southward, and the branches to the northward.
Well, what I see going on here is that as the knowledge of copper and the tools you could make with it expanded, the ability to push nature back and use it, as we're going to see, increased so that you're actually at a point where, okay, nature no longer has you under the thumb necessarily. Like, you can actually do something about it. And we see again that number motif that you were talking about, sharpening the axes. And just to talk about sharpening the axe a little bit, or the blade, I guess, brought the polished blade to sharpness. I think there's an idea of there that is, again, gaining skill and not being useless. Like, you're working and learning and making sure that you are capable of using the tools that are around you. And I think in life that's a lot of what we do, is try to get better at what we're doing so that we're able to do things competently and not be terrible at everything.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That's a great point. I mean, how knowledge gets built, and I mean, he's literally growing larger as it's happening, right? He's growing larger, sort of in the literal sense, but even if you take it to a symbolic level, the tools are enabling him to become the size symbolically to destroy this tree. And I mean, it becomes so easy, theoretically, with the use of these tools, right? So yeah, as the knowledge develops, and I guess as well, as confidence builds, something like that, they try different things, they experiment, they grow bigger and grow more able to handle these great hindrances from nature that they weren't able to handle before. And he takes care of it. There he goes.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It really shows I would say, like, the power of tools. Like I was saying before, we're not the fastest or the strongest or can't swim that well or anything like that, but it's our ability to use tools and build culture. That's what allows us to survive and thrive.
Exactly. And this illustration of it is just amazing. And I mean, especially how they had Väinämöinen so skeptical that it could work as well. I mean, I think this whole thing is just a great description of the human condition of as far as advancement goes. Like, first you had really just nature doing its own thing where, maybe there's a little bit of light human intervention and they mow the fields, they clear the fields up a little bit, but then what they clear gets burned down because nature's cruel and doesn't discriminate, sort of thing. And so, but then they find that the land is more fertile, something like that, and so they maybe try experimenting, put some stuff in there, but they can't control it yet. But now they have tools, and now with these tools, maybe they can knock down the oak tree. And maybe they can do more than knock down the oak tree.
Exactly. I think we should maybe move on, see what they do with the oak tree.
Sounds good to me. All right, we're going to go to verse 204, 191 to 204. Line. Sorry if I've been saying verse. Line. Back to the poem. He who took a branch from off it took prosperity unceasing. What was broken from the summit gave unending skill in magic. He who broke a leafy branchlet gathered with it love unending. What remained of fragments scattered, chips of wood and broken splinters, on the bright expanse of ocean, on the far extending billows. In the breeze were gently rocking, on the waves were lightly drifted, like the boats on ocean's surface, like the ships amid the sea waves.
So now we're seeing the sort of the bounty, the treasure that this tree had to offer, that dealing with this, in some ways the tree is almost like the dragon. It's this beast that you have to overcome to get the treasure. And what treasure are we getting? Well, there's unending skill in magic. And, if you're gathering the leafy branchlets, you're getting love unending. You're getting things that you're going to be able to, go on the ocean with and build boats and these really good things. And with the magic, whenever I come across magic in these stories, I always take it as this idea of maybe manifesting thought into reality. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be like hocus pocus Harry Potter kind of stuff, although it would be really cool if it was. And I like when it talks about unending skill in magic, my first thought was magic wands. You just make a whole bunch of magic wands. But I think more, well, in some ways more incredibly, like being able to manifest in the world, like something that you've thought of. So like shelter or weapons, or like now you've got like a medium for art that will last a while. So that there's something really special about that. And then just weapons and stuff like that, you're going to be able to like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome if we could kill this animal easier? Well, now your spears are going to be much better. Arrows, that kind of thing. Like you're starting to push the ball along. And who broke leafy branchlet gathered with love unending. Like you're going to be building shelter, and just life is going to be better. And if you're the one who's doing it and building out of it, like, yeah, you're going to be well respected because what you're doing is absolutely needed by the community.
Yeah, you get prosperity, love, and magic from the discovery and mastery of woodcraft, which is what this certainly is. And so, I mean, causality wise, you go from tools to wood, to like tools to, and I mean, like we take that completely for granted, but houses are still made out of wood for the most part in most of the world, at least, you know, where I live, where we live, right? In a lot of the world, houses are made of wood. Some are brick, but you know, I think that's a luxury anyway. But yeah, it's just you would get the means to it would unlock so many things in like an instant. If you're able to knock down a tree, obviously your tools are also good enough to make something out of the tree, because before you were able to knock down the tree, you didn't have tools good enough to do anything with wood, for example, that would have just fallen naturally, dead wood, something like that. Maybe you could move it or do something with it, but you wouldn't have had the mastery and control over it. So now you have the tools, and now you can do the things. And then again, I mean, you get prosperity unceasing. You have the ability to cut down trees for firewood, right? You have the capability, as you said, shelter. And I mean, that's the magic part, I think, where it's like you take it from the summit. First of all, that's aiming for the highest good for the most part, because it's like, you know, the summit, that's symbolically like the top bit, you know, that's the best. But if you get that and you have access to the whole thing, and you are able to do something with that, it would have unlocked the potential for so many things. And yeah, I think it would have been like magic.
For sure. It makes me think of the, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said that technology is just, you know, magic explained kind of thing, or something to that effect, that, or to older people's, our technology would seem like magic, that type of idea. I'm definitely not getting it completely right, but yeah, no, it would have been incredible. Like that, it literally would have been a revolution in their lives.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's what this is really saying, you know, is that, first of all, they're saying like whoever broke pieces from it, right? So they're not just saying, you know, the guy who cut it down. Obviously, he would have been like well respected sort of thing, especially the first one to do it. I mean, like, come on, he probably would have gotten love unending for that.
Oh, no doubt.
But but everyone benefited, you know? This is an advancement, a massive leap for humanity, and everyone would have benefited.
Oh, no question. And this is what's going to start off the Bronze Age as well, because you need copper for bronze. And I mean, then you're like, it just opens the door for everything. It just like, you can't play it up too much.
Agreed. Huge moment. And I mean, again, their enunciation of it so well. This is definitely better than anything we have in the Norse sources for the gradual advancement of human society. Like they touch on it very, very briefly in the Voluspa, but it's like sort of, you're in this stage, now you're in this stage, now you're in this stage. In this one, it's like, this is so micro level. It's very, very good. And I mean, they enunciated it and they understood it on some level. It's really cool.
For sure. Too, with the Norse stuff, you get a lot of like dwarves doing it for the humans. And well, this is interesting. Whoa.
Yeah. Do we just both have the same?
Well, because he starts off as like this diminutive.
What?
I don't even know.
We're going to have to report back on this one.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's a really cool idea. That is awesome. If this just made sense of something out of Norse that's just been something I couldn't ever really understand all that well, but if this gives another layer, wow.
I'm gonna have to look at the names of those dwarves in the Voluspa again, because maybe that's like learning anyway. Oh, this is nuts.
This is fun.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we move on?
Yes, let's go. I don't know enough about dwarves off the top of my head to go on with that rabbit hole, and that's a whole other podcast too. So
I agree, but I think we're on to something.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Okay. Back to the poem. Lines 205 to 216. Northward drove the wind, the fragments, where the little maid of Pohjola stood on beach and washed her headdress, and she washed her clothes and rinsed them on the shingle by the ocean, on a tongue of land projecting. On the waves she saw the fragments, put them in her birch bark wallet, in her wallet took them homeward. In the well-closed yard she stored them, for the arrows of the sorcerer, for the chase to furnish weapons.
Well, this has taken an ominous turn, and it strikes me as that even though a new development is good, it can be used by people who are not even necessarily your enemies, but just outside of your own tribe, as a way to attack or hurt you. And certainly to prosper on their own, which, I mean, if your tribe is competing for resources with this other tribe, that's not helpful in any way. So you might be building all these wonderful things, but if they're also building these wonderful things, you're still pretty evenly matched. And especially if now you're using more resources and they're using more resources, you're going to come into conflict.
Yeah, I think there's something too, because a lot of cultures developed at different rates, but when they were in close proximity to one another, it was like inevitable that technologies would transfer, especially on the level of like tribes and stuff like that, because they would have been so close and so small, right, that it would have just kind of naturally happened. Might have taken some time, but and in this case, well, Pohjola is certainly the unknown. I liken it again to Jotunheim, the land of the giants in Norse mythology, where this is like the unknown, just period, the unknown, and as opposed to Kalevala, which is theoretically the land of the home, of the known, and then you have Pohjola, which is the land of the unknown. We've sort of we've made the connection between it and Lapland, the far north regions that are a lot more inhospitable in the winter, but still, it's like this technology is making its way to the unknown, and these advancements have unintended consequences. Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely covered it. It's really just, it doesn't just help your tribe; it will also help others. And so at the discovery, this maid of Pohjola, she takes it back, and weapons. We already talked about the possibility of weapons. So here it is, right?
Exactly, and it's the other guys with the weapons, right? So it's definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, I like that they put that in there. It's sort of, it just says that even though this was a great thing, it also creates potential problems as well. Everything always in balance. Chaos is going to distribute everything chaotically, which usually does not mean only in a good way.
Yeah,
usually.
Absolutely.
I don't have much more about that particular section, but I think it's important. Just as important as remembering that the dragon is always still there after Ragnarok, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Where the snake's always in Eden.
Exactly. So we'll move on?
Let's move on.
Okay. Lines 217 through 236. Back to the poem. When the oak at last had fallen, and the evil tree was leveled, once again the sun shone brightly, and the pleasant moonlight glimmered, and the clouds extended widely, and the rainbows spanned the heavens. O'er the cloud-encompassed headland, on the island's misty summit. Then the wastes were clothed with verdure, and the woods grew up and flourished, leaves on trees and grass in meadows. In the trees the birds were singing. Loudly sang the cheery throstle. In the treetops called the cuckoo. Then the earth brought forth her berries, shone the fields with golden blossoms. Herbs of every species flourished. plants and trees of all descriptions. But the barley would not flourish, nor the precious seed would ripen.
So we just saw the overcoming of the giant oak tree. And now I think what we're seeing is the kind of the overcoming of, or at least we're being presented with the problems of agriculture and how hard it is to have learned it without being taught, and sort of, I guess, discover it. Because you've got everything growing, and because you're actually using more of the stuff in the environment, things are probably growing better. Like it'd be like keeping if you keep a population of a certain animal down, then that animal group will thrive because there's more resources for everyone. That's why you have culls that. I would say most of the time, if there's like a cull, it's for an ecological reason. It isn't just to like kill pests or whatever. It's to actually like support that animal group, and you see that just between animals as well. 1 year the deer population will explode, and then the next year the wolf population will explode because there's enough resources, and then there's sort of this balance between the two. It's all about balancing it in the environment. But we don't. So we're seeing, I think, some of that balancing, and they're not masters of it yet because they can't get the barley to flourish and the seed to ripen. So that they're still missing some crucial information before they can truly become masters of agriculture.
Right. I think it's the idea that human intervention and human stewardship has enabled a different level of prosperity, certainly for those things that flourish on their own without significant help. And especially with the opening of, maybe this is the clearing of a lot of large trees, because these large trees would have been the best to build houses and ships and whatever, the large things for sure. And so then you get all this stuff that I think, they're a lot of them they're talking about, certainly trees, but berries and fields shown with blossoms, herbs, plants. These are all things that I think would have had more room to grow in the absence of these gigantic trees that were kind of closing off the forests, sort of thing. But crops, though, that's a different story. So they've enabled more natural growth and natural advancement, but you're right. Like the actual agriculture has not developed yet, and maybe they sort of are experimenting here at some point. They're saying it won't flourish. Maybe they are sort of seeing how, like, okay, an acorn falls here, maybe let's try putting some seeds over here, but it just doesn't kind of happen on its own. And so that's a different level of development, obviously.
For sure. Something interesting, I'm not quite sure what to make of it, is the cuckoo. I guess that's where they get like the cuckoo clocks, right? Yeah. And I don't know if they would have known about this at the time, but this particular bird, the way it reproduces is it will it'll go into someone else's nest and push their eggs out and then lay its eggs, and the birds will take care of it as their own, even though it's a cuckoo bird, not whatever they are. Like for example, a robin. They'll push the robin eggs out and lay their own eggs, so that, and it's it's where Shakespeare got the idea of the cuckold. I guess husband or wife who their partners stepping out on them, as it were. And I was trying to figure out the significance of it, and I kind of went. It's kind of a dark place actually, where if are humans the ones who are pushing out the other the other things that are living there so that they can live there and being taken care of by that nature. Now we think of it as unfair, but obviously there's I guess, a balance to it. Like you don't see like cuckoos running wild and just like destroying populations or genociding anything. Whereas with humans, actually, you do. So maybe there's a lesson there, but that, maybe there is a way for us to exist without, wiping other things out completely.
I didn't even go there at all. Not gonna lie, I just thought it was a nice bird making nice songs in this particular detail here. But yeah, sure, that's a good point.
Maybe I mean it might just be because of the song, but I don't know. It's a fairly particular way of breeding that they have, so I thought there might be something to it.
Hey, fair enough. Not going to take away kind of any symbolism there. I didn't even think of that. So good enough. But again, like where we leave it is just that, all this nature is flourishing, but crops are not. Shall we continue?
Yes.
All right. Line 237 to 250. Back to the poem. Then the aged Väinämöinen walked around and deeply pondered by the blue wave's sandy margin on the mighty ocean's border. And 6 grains of corn he found there, 7 fine seeds of corn he found there. On the borders of the ocean, on the yielding sandy margin. In a marten's skin he placed them, from the leg of summer squirrel. Then he went to sow the fallows, on the ground the seeds to scatter, near to Kalevala's own fountain, and upon the field of Osmo.
So again, we see the that number motif, which is, now that I'm looking for it, it's neat to see the different examples. I almost take this as the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, because you're using animal skins, which would be very common. I mean, as a like a pouch or a carrying device, and you're filling it with seeds so that you can transport them. And I wonder if there's some symbolism there that it was transitioning, and that there was some sort of the knowledge of hunting then transitioned into this knowledge of planting, or at least something like that. And you also see, well, I'm not too sure about what is it, the marten. Yeah, and the marten skin, but I know like with squirrels, they plant sort of accidentally, but they do plant seeds. They dig a hole to hide the seeds for winter or whatever, but a lot of times they forget. So I'm wondering if there's something there as well, just sort of that comparison that, yeah.
Interesting. No, certainly I think this is a time of transition, and I think it's true that human populations were unable to grow much further from that of hunter-gathering societies until agriculture developed. And so this would definitely be another kind of obstacle here. And they're trying to find solutions. They're certainly trying to find, maybe agriculture isn't the goal per se, but they're looking at this and saying, okay, how can we get more food? And maybe they see some naturally occurring sources of food and are like, well, if I take an acorn and I plant it over here, maybe that'll make a tree. Why can't I take some of this stuff, plant it over here, make some more of this stuff, and then we can have more stuff to eat? It's kind of a natural progression, I think, but then it's the mechanism of how it's actually going to work. And well, I like your point about it kind of being transitional, especially through the use of the skins here. I think the marten and the summer squirrel, I think that's supposed to be the same animal here, I think, but I also don't know enough about martens or summer squirrels to say definitively. But either way, yeah, I think it is this transition period, and he's gonna go sow some seeds now and try new things. So
that's sort of all I have. So if we want to
go
on to the growing.
Yeah, okay. All right, so 251 to 264. Back to the poem. From a tree there chirped the titmouse. Osmo's barley will not flourish, nor will Kalevala's oats prosper, while untilled remains the country, and uncleared remains the forest, nor the fire has burned it over. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, ground his axe blade edge to sharpness and began to fell the forest, toiling hard to clear the country. All the lovely trees he leveled, sparing but a single birch tree, that the birds might rest upon it, and from thence might call the cuckoo.
So I love this because we see Väinämöinen learning and using the skill that he was at first reluctant to use and kind of didn't believe that it would work, but then he saw that it worked and was like, well, I can do this too. And we really see I would say this is like the birth of agriculture right here, where you're clearing a field so that you can till the land and grow things there, because it's not, a lot of things won't grow. First of all, a lot of things won't grow with trees because they require so much nutrients from the soil, and they take up so much space. So you're not going to have fields of grains that live amongst the trees. And so, it's just interesting to see that one, Väinämöinen learned something and is, it was proven to him, so he's using it. And then the actual birth of agriculture here in a way that we would actually recognize, clearing the fields and then tilling and sowing. So, yeah.
Exactly. And first of all, so we didn't address Osmo, the name Osmo from the last group there, but I don't understand it as being overly consequential. It means young man. I think it's just saying like the fields of young men, like they're trying to sow it upon them and everything like that, but it wasn't working before. And now the idea that a mouse would tell Väinämöinen this knowledge sort of thing, I think that just says something about, first of all, animals and nature in general understand the mysteries of nature in a way that we humans can't understand on that kind of instinctual level. I think it implies something like that. But when I get to like how someone might actually find this stuff out is possibly the idea like of a forest fire, and the fertility after a forest fire is like it can kind of all burns down, but then after that things kind of grow up again. And so here it would be like the clearing of a field, burning it, and then growing stuff on it. And that is a specific type of agriculture practiced in Finland for hundreds of years. It's
fascinating.
It's called slash and burn agriculture, very old practice. We have examples all over the world that are very, very old, but it's definitely been practiced in Finland for at least 500-600 years, something like that. And it originated in the area of eastern Finland and what would be now kind of northern Estonia, or even far northwest Russia. If you kind of were to draw a circle kind of on a map and put like a third of it in eastern Finland and then kind of half of it in the Russian bit next to it, and then also like a little bit of Estonia, you would get the area that this was practiced in. And it went out larger and larger, like the area that it was practiced, it spread and spread and spread, because they must have been kind of in the perfect spot for this, like a very, very forested area where they could slash down a section of forest, burn it in a controlled manner, and then grow their crops in that area, and they would have unlimited amount of essentially space to do that, because this doesn't scale. This doesn't scale to gigantic populations. This is actually essentially practiced today in Brazil, in the Amazon, where you'll get these farmers who every year they'll go and they'll burn like a hectare or so of land to grow new crops, and that's how we're losing the rainforest, because it just keeps going. They don't let the forest regrow. They just keep using it for fields, sort of thing, right? Versus here, it would have been like they would let it grow back because they had just so much forest. And this is an old practice, and this is directly exactly what's happening here. Like Exactly. And the spread so far, there was even a name for a group of people that went out into Finland. Into Sweden, into northern Sweden. They called them the Forest Finns because they would burn down the forest and have their crops, and that would be that. They were like a distinct group of people in Sweden for a long time, distinct from other groups of Finnish type people that kind of lived there, because Sweden ruled Finland for a while. There was a little bit of kind of an adjacent area near the Sweden-Finland border where the cultures just kind of meshed and everything like that. And then groups of Finns who went to what's more like mainland Sweden to live and sort of thing, and there's still a minority population there. But this group, they practiced this slash and burn agriculture for a very long time, and they developed their own culture, and they're like essentially a protected group not protected, but they're like a recognized minority group in Sweden, and they advocate for their own distinct culture, separate from, first of all, regular Swedes, but also other Finnish type people, and this is their heritage.
That's amazing, and it's interesting because you actually still see that type of farming today, but in not so much a forested area, but a lot of times farmers, after they've harvested, will burn sort of whatever's left over to enrich the soil. And there's even a nursery rhyme about that, or like a song that kids sing about, and it comes from Germany, about the ladybugs flying, like flyaway ladybugs were about to burn the field kind of thing. And I used to know how it went, but it's probably better for all of you that you're not going to hear me sing a kid's song. But yeah, no, it's still a commonly used practice. Except they're not burning new land. They're burning this one plot of land to rejuvenate the soil. Right.
Versus I figure for in this situation, it would have been like the most fertile land would have been what was just burnt, something like that.
Definitely.
And then I think that I don't know for certain if they always did this or whether after a period of a few years they abandoned it to grow back or something like that. But the point is that it was sustainable in this like widely forested area and for a small population, not sustainable for huge populations trying to take more every year, and not letting it grow back. That's what's not sustainable, not scalable.
For sure. And I just want to bring up one last thing for me. They mentioned the cuckoo again, and I wonder again if now that if it just affirms sort of the idea that we've pushed things out so that we could grow ourselves. But I mean, that's nature. If it's done in a sort of sustainable way, not just, burning huge swaths of land for, every year.
Right, for sure. But yeah, this is the discovery of this specific type of agriculture that was practiced in the area that the Kalevala was composed and compiled. So yeah, bang on. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, moving on.
Let's go.
All right. Line 265 to 286. Back to the poem. In the sky there soared an eagle, of the birds of air the greatest, and he came and gazed around him. Wherefore is this work unfinished, and the birch tree still unfallen? Wherefore spare the beauteous birch tree? Said the aged Väinämöinen, therefore is the birch tree left standing, that the birds may perch upon it. All the birds of air may rest there. Said the bird of air, the eagle, very wisely hast thou acted, thus to leave the birch tree standing, and the lovely tree unfallen, that the birds might perch upon it, and that I myself may rest there. Then the bird of air struck fire, and the flames rose up in brightness, while the north wind fanned the forest, and the northeast wind blew fiercely. All the trees were burned to ashes, till the sparks were quite extinguished.
Well, there we see like an even more explicit example of that slash and burn. And I think with the presence of the eagle, I think it's like this idea that it's kind of like victory, or like this is the highest form of agriculture that we have. Like this is what's going to produce the best results. And I also think it's interesting leaving the birch tree. I'm not totally sure about why it would be the birch tree in particular. And I know like birch bark can be used as like headache relief. Like what is it? It's an aspirin. It's like acetylsalic acid or something like that. And so there's pain relief there. And you can actually use something from the bark as sunscreen. But I think, again, it shows sort of this balance that even though they're clearing the forest, they're still leaving something there for the birds and like for the environment to continue to exist and even thrive. I mean, the eagle's quite happy that there's still trees there. So it's not... he's not begrudging them the space. It's okay. You're living in kind of in harmony, or at least in partnership with us. So like, go for it. This is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, even he's like, why aren't you done? Why didn't you do all of it? But it's like, well, hey, this is a spot for you to land. He's like, oh yeah, I can land there. Huh. I can rest there. Okay. Yeah, the eagle symbolism we've covered before, but I think it really is in this case. They have achieved the highest good that they possibly can in this particular instance. They found what is going to work for them, and nature rewards them, for lack of a better term. I mean, like they're saying that the fire came from the eagle, but I mean, in a regular circumstance, they would know how to light fire and everything, but symbolically, it's like, yeah, you've done good. Here's your reward, and then they get to burn the land, and that's fine. Like, you're exactly right. It's like, yeah, we're going to live in harmony with the natural world around us. We're going to do this so that we can prosper, but not take everything out, because that would just, well, that would destroy everything else, and so they're not doing that. And yeah, for birch, I don't have too much there, but I do appreciate that they've left something, and I think that's the real point.
Yeah, I would agree with that, for sure.
So everything's been set to fire, and should we see what happens?
Sounds good.
Okay, we're going to... Another fairly long one here, all the way to line 330. Back to the poem. Then the aged Väinämöinen took the 6 seeds from his satchel, and he took the 7 small kernels from the marten's skin. He took them from the leg of summer squirrel, from the leg of summer ermine. Then he went to sow the country and to scatter seeds around him, and he spoke the words which follow. Now I stoop the seeds to scatter as from the Creator's fingers, from the hand of him Almighty, that the country may be fertile, and the corn may grow and flourish. Patroness of lowland country, old one of the plains, earth mother, let the tender blade spring upward, let the earth support and cherish. Might of earth will never fail us, never while the earth existeth. When the givers are propitious, and creation's daughters aid us. Rise, O earth, from out thy slumber, field of the Creator rouse thee. Make the blade arise and flourish, let the stalks grow up and lengthen, that the ears may grow by thousands, yet 100-fold increasing, by my plowing and my sowing, in return for all my labor. Ukko, thou of gods the highest, Father, thou in heaven abiding, thou to whom the clouds are subject, of the scattered clouds the ruler. All thy clouds do thou assemble, in the light make clear thy counsel. Send thou forth a cloud from eastward, in the northwest let one gather. Send thou others from the westward, let them drive along from southward. Send the light rain forth from heaven, let the clouds distill with honey, that the corn may sprout up strongly and the stalks may wave and rustle.
So this is pretty neat, because we see sort of after getting the blessing of the eagle, Väinämöinen going and taking seeds and kernels and planting them and scattering them around, and I would say planting them with a prayer. You know, he talks about what he's doing, you know, mimicking the hand of him Almighty, and appealing to the patroness of lowland country, Earth Mother, who I was wondering if that would also be just like his mother. I think it's the same person. And then sort of, again, with prayers, in my view, being sort of reorientation towards the highest good, or orienting towards the highest good. He's talking about the best things that could happen, you know, the tender blades springing upward, and the earth supporting and cherishing what's growing, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a line in here that I love, that, you know, the earth will never fail us, never while the earth existeth, when the givers are propitious and creation's daughters aid us. And it literally means, you know, when the givers are generous, and when creation's daughters, you know, probably very similar to the maidens and brides that we read about before. So as long as, you know, as long as there's generosity, so probably from the gods themselves and from the earth, but I would also say, like, from the people who are doing the growing, as long as they're generous with their land and what they're growing with their people and their tribe, but also to the environment itself. You know, they're giving to it rather than taking from it. And I think we've seen that, and can kind of scientifically prove that that's a much better way of doing agriculture than sort of stripping the land of all its worth and then moving on.
Sure. Yeah. Fully with you on that. This whole thing, I mean, this whole section is just amazing, because I mean, this is like a real fertility prayer. And certainly I think what would have been done as an annual thing, like at the sowing, at the time of sowing. And I've got some things about that, but no, I think you're right on how it's like, as long as they're within balance of nature and putting things to the intention that they want to, you know, like acting with intentionality, because, you know, for these people who wouldn't have understood the science behind agriculture, who certainly wouldn't have understood all of the things that they could do to mitigate, you know, natural disasters, they would have been, the harvest would have always been an unknown in general. The result of the harvest would have been unknown. And so what are you going to do about that? First of all, okay, they're going to pray. They're going to say, hey, Ukko, like, give us your best rain and make the corn sprout up strongly. So first of all, on that, I mean, I think that's taking as much ownership as they possibly could in this situation. By praying, they're at least doing something to potentially mitigate any negative consequences that might arise from natural disasters or rain not coming or something like that. They're at least putting it out there, hey, like, this is it, right? And then I'm sure it's also something like it's focusing them on like the magnitude of the consequences if that's not happening. And so I'm sure they would do everything, you know, go and burn the fields properly, prepare them properly, and sow the seeds and everything like that. But then it's like, okay, what else can we do? And I think that's comforting. And I think that also kind of implies that, well, if you're not going to do that, if you're going to kind of get lax on that, well, what's the result? If they get a negative result and they say in their harvest and they think, okay, well, what is the solution here? They at least are doing something. They go and, you know, pray some more. Maybe they make more sacrifices. I mean, what is that other than trying to make all the right sacrifices necessary to get the reward? Like, that's, I think, these ancient peoples taking the responsibility over their own well-being as far as they possibly can. That's my view of what these fertility prayers really represent. Of course, it represents what they want to see happen, but I think it absolutely is them doing everything possible and making all the right sacrifices possible as they understood them in order to ensure their prosperity.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. It's a very purposeful, like you said, intention or direction of their will towards this good. So yeah, absolutely.
And then beyond that, into the specifics here. So this is just one of my favorite sections of this poem, and there have been a lot of good sections to this poem. But the prayer to Ukko. So we've seen him before a little bit. He's essentially the head god of the pantheon, but was likely originally something like a sky god or a thunder god, something like that. Certainly in charge of the rain and the weather sort of thing, because I mean he's calling for clouds and that. Possibly related to that Yumi or Jumala who was there. Like possibly the names were related or became Ukko, something like that. Ukko, Ukkonen, the diminutive form of Ukko. That's their word for thunder. I don't know if we'd covered that, but yeah, it's like the exact same as Thor and thunder. It's like the exact same thing. So Ukko, Ukkonen, same difference. But anyway, so they're making these prayers of fertility, and the cool thing about this is that their midsummer festivities would have been to Ukko. This would have been Ukon Juhla, Ukko's festival. It would have been midsummer. Nowadays, it's called Juhannus, and I actually forget what that translates to, but it's like just a more traditional midsummer festivity. But I think they have some of these old practices there, but it's still like just sort of their midsummer thing. But the other side to it is that they would do these other festivals to Ukko at the spring sowing. These were called the Vakkajuhlat, or Ukon Vakka, which is the Vakka festival, or Ukko's Vakka, which was, I've seen different definitions. It could either be like a unit of measurement type, like a bushel, or it's an offering of alcohol. Either way, they both kind of make sense there. And well, the idea at Ukon Vakka was that they would make these offerings to Ukko, and then they would all get drunk and have a big party, but it was at the spring sowing. So when they would sow the seeds, they would make these offerings essentially to Ukko. They would have a big feast for him, and they would say prayers like this. There's actually one of my favorite songs is called Ukon Vakka by Korpiklani, and they go all out with this song where the chorus goes, "Oh, Ukko, highest God, oldest, most steadfast, the greatest, give to us a decent sowing and produce a harvest, greatest of all." And it's like, that's exactly what this is too. And this is supposed to be what they would sing and what they would do. There's evidence of this stuff up to the 18th, 19th century, which is why this is like able to be so kind of ingrained in the cultural memory. But this is like what would have been practiced ritually year over year for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that's just so cool to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That to see that captured here is that's something special. That's amazing. I would actually I'd love to go see that, like in Finland.
I don't think they don't still like do that necessarily. Maybe there would be some kind of revival or something, but yeah, it's not something currently ongoing. It's just, it's in the cultural memory,
Oh, so they don't have, there wouldn't be, you don't think there'd be like a group that would do it, or?
Not that I know of, no.
Oh, wow. Well, maybe we need to go to Finland and start it up again.
That's a good idea. I'm sure there's people who, have a festival kind of around this year and like say this or something like that.
For sure.
And it's certainly in the cultural memory again, but again, the references to this kind of apparently died out around the 18th, 19th century, but there's evidence that they were still practiced right up until then. And I mean, that's a period of time when, well, technology was spreading out into rural areas, easier transport, things like that, and Christianity would have certainly kind of snuffed out the last areas of rural pagan practice in a lot of cases. But the Finnish peoples were one of the last ones to really have this happen to. So
For sure.
But yeah, that's why this section is just so cool to me. It's like the appeal, the prayer to Ukko to have a good harvest, which happened down the ages at the spring sowing.
Yeah, that's incredible, and to have it right here, it's
they captured something real. Lönnrot captured something real, which is awesome.
definitely.
You ready to move on?
Yes, let's go.
Lines 331 to 358. Back to the poem. Ukko, then, of gods the highest, Father of the highest heaven, heard, and all the clouds assembled. In the light made clear his counsel. And he sent a cloud from eastward. In the northwest let one gather. Others too he sent from westward. Let them drive along from southward. Linked them edge to edge together, and he closed the rifts between them. Then he sent the rain from heaven, and the clouds distilled sweet honey, that the corn might sprout up stronger, and the stalks might wave and rustle. Thus the sprouting germ was nourished, and the rustling stalks grew upward, from the soft earth of the cornfield, through the toil of Väinämöinen. After this, 2 days passed over. After 2 nights, after 3 nights. When the week was full completed, Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, wandered forth to see the progress. How his plowing and his sowing and his labors had resulted. There he found the barley growing, and the ears were all 6-cornered, and the stalks were all 3-knotted.
So Ukko has, I would say, listened to and accepted these prayers and delivered, rain that distilled sweet honey. That's like, honey is such a great symbol for this, because one day it was hard to get because you had to contend with bees who would sting you, and there isn't all that much in a hive either. So it's a very rare and precious commodity because it tastes so good. And here it's literally like falling from the sky for these crops. So it's like the best possible rain of all time. And I think it's great too, because you're seeing Ukko respond to the prayers and the sacrifices. So it really reinforces that if you do it properly, there is a good chance that Ukko will respond properly. And that I think that's true of life, that when you aim at the highest good and then you work towards it in a sort of honest and steadfast way, chances are you're going to get something that even if it's not the ultimate goal that you set out with, it's going to be something that's good. And at that point you can either sort of accept the goodness that has been bestowed upon you, or you can be bitter about not getting, that end goal that you wanted, and get bitter and sort of go all Cain about it. But here it's just like, to me, it's just such an uplifting. The whole thing is very uplifting. Like you're doing this thing, you're praying to the gods and they're responding, and you're making the right sacrifices and working hard enough to be worthy of it. And so then you're getting, 6-cornered corn and strong stalks and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, it just feels so, like right, I guess. Like this is how it's supposed to be. And I think that's why we saw you'd have the festivals and stuff mimicking this, because that's how it's supposed to be. And yeah.
Right. Exactly. This is like the fruit of his labors coming true. And I mean, I think that's true, right? Like, he did the plowing, he did the sowing, he did the work. He did the work. You have to do the work. It's not gonna happen without it. And one point here is that this this is the next phase of agriculture, because it is specifically the plowing, which was, well, it was assimilated to the idea of the phallus and the seeding of the earth with seed. So it was explicitly sexual, actually, and it was explicitly like that was their understanding of the joining of the plowing and the seeding with Mother Earth is going to produce these crops, and there was an intentionality to it. They had to do the work, but it didn't always work out. In a lot of ways, that's like kids, right? Like, you produce a kid and sometimes they don't work out the way you intend. Now I'm getting why that might have been the in the Havamal last episode or the episode before. I think the episode before, part 3 maybe, where it was like you don't always get a don't check on your crops or on a child until they're grown or something like that, and
or don't trust in them. That's
yes,
what it was. Yes.
Right. So that would have been our most recent Havamal episode, I think. Yeah, but I get why it's the same thing, right? It's they understood it essentially the same way as human reproduction. That's how they understood agriculture. That was the way they made sense of it and the way they made sense of the world. And yeah, this is them, like, by doing these festivals, the work is done at that point. They're doing the work, or it's done and everything like that. And now they're making the appeal because they've done everything, and now they're like, hey, can you come on, some rain, please? You know.
Definitely. I like that you mentioned how explicitly sexual they saw it. I've read some, would have been like diaries of farmers probably from the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, and the sexual nature of their writing is ridiculous. Like not that far off from, like, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey type of thing. It's bizarre. Like, but it's completely that. It's all about, if I remember correctly, it was like, you know, penetrating the soil of Mother Earth and filling her. Yeah, it was filling her with the seed as deep as possible, or something. Like, it wasn't even tongue in cheek. It was just right there on the page. Like, this is sex. Yeah, it was. It's pretty wild, and this wasn't uncommon. This was the normal way of looking at it.
Yeah, right. And I mean, it's a way of understanding the world that would have certainly made sense, because the mysteries of childbirth, everything like that, versus the mysteries of the growth of plants, and it's a similar cycle too. It's like you have to grow, and then you have to burn something, and it's death to birth to all this. It's how cyclical time developed. We've already talked about this a little bit, but yeah, this is how it all developed. Yeah, this whole point, like, I don't know, the sexual nature. I mean, even if that's a topic that these days might be a little, not awkward to talk about something like that, but it's true. That's how they viewed it, right? So,
Exactly.
And it worked out here. This is what they're emulating. That's another good point, is these festivals being what they're emulating. They're like, they want the best result to happen every time. And who wouldn't? Maybe it's hard to expect it's always going to be the best possible. Like that's just unrealistic, but why wouldn't you aim for it? Why wouldn't you ask for it? Because the worst that's going to happen is it's not quite there. This is maybe a little bit foreign to my generally pessimistic mind, where I would prefer to, lower expectations and be pleasantly surprised when it's better. But realistically, if you aim for the highest good, maybe it's not so much a naive optimism. They're at least asking for it, though. You know what I mean?
Asking for it and working towards it. So yeah, it's not naive. I think it's, they have a goal and they're working towards it, and they're hoping for it, and that they're going to do everything they absolutely can to get to it. And after that, you can't control it, but you can certainly make prayers about it and celebrate the good work and sort of have that positive energy, and that's part of it too, is like you can look at it like, oh, we had a great harvest this year and it only be, 80% of what you were hoping. Well, that's still 80% of what you're hoping. Focus on that rather than the 20% that, got destroyed or eaten by animals or whatever.
And I would figure that they would have to make their general calculations for surplus or whatever scarcity surplus based on like half of their crops failing or something like that. And if they got more than that, then they have a surplus for the next year. And something like that. They can build things up. They can say maybe they can grow a little,
Exactly.
So, no, we're coming to the end here. This will be our last one, but should we just finish this off?
I think so.
Okay. So this will be 359 to the end, 378. Back to the poem. Then the aged Väinämöinen wandered on and gazed around him, and the cuckoo, bird of springtime, came and saw the birch tree growing. Wherefore is the birch left standing and unfelled the slender birch tree? Said the aged Väinämöinen. Therefore is the birch left standing and unfelled the slender birch tree. As a perch for thee, O cuckoo, whence the cuckoo's cry may echo. From thy sand-hued throat cry sweetly, with thy silver voice call loudly, with thy tin-like voice cry clearly. Call it morning, call it evening, and at noontide call thou likewise, to rejoice my plains surrounding, that my woods may grow more cheerful, that my coast may grow more wealthy, and my region grow more fruitful.
And so I think we have that in, at least in this Runo, that last call for the highest good, that all of these things may happen, that the woods around grow more cheerful and the coast grow more wealthy and the region grow more fruitful. He's not just asking for his crops to grow. He's asking for everything to do well, or, in and around him. And again, I wonder with the cuckoo if it is this idea that, yes, we've displaced something, but we actually want everything to grow because that's the only way we're going to survive as well, as if everything is doing well. And again, we've seen it in, I guess we're only on Runo 2, but it's a very common theme, I would say, in this, of that idea of balance and harmony, that everything is working together and working to survive and thrive together, whether it's the masculine and feminine, nature and man, or chaos and order, that they're always right there with each other to sort of, I guess, help each other and make sure that you get the best of everything.
Yeah, I think this is like intentionally. Yeah, I'll go with intentionally. They're preserving nature around them, and he wants it to add to the beauty around. Like they appreciate nature, they appreciate the environment around them, and I mean, that has to be there, right? You have to be able to appreciate the land around you and appreciate the things around you and want the best for everyone around you. That's a big thing, like wanting the best for even the people you don't like is a hard thing to do, but it still means like the entire world is going to get better. I mean, we've been eradicating poverty at just a massive rate, and this is just the entire world getting better for everyone. We might have nice lives here, but across the world, a lot of people don't have that. And this is like just the idea of wanting the best for everything so that together we can all prosper. And I mean, it might be a little hippie, whatever, but it's still like, it's just a great idea where it's like still preserving nature so that it can flourish and wanting the best for everything. And this is after getting the reward of a good harvest sort of thing. This is still kind of their consideration where we get the good harvest, but also the forest is healthy and nature is healthy. And I mean, from there, they would still get animals to hunt and things like that. I mean, it would have been important. So,
well, that's exactly it. If their crops are great, that's great. But if everything around them is sort of not doing well, that's absolutely going to affect them. They're not going to have animals to hunt. Animals may even come to like eat their crops the next year because it's doing well. And then also, like, we saw that, how do you pronounce it? Pohja? Pohja. I mean, they've got weapons. Like, if their crops aren't doing well, they're going to come and take yours. And, like, that's a very real threat. So you want them to be doing well, because then, it's kind of like the idea, if everyone has a full belly and everyone kind of has the same amount of stuff, like, you're not going to get that much conflict because everyone's got that level of satisfaction. It's when you start introducing, like, massive levels of inequality, that's when stuff starts falling apart, and you get real resentment between, I guess, the haves and the have-nots. And it almost sounds Marxist, which it's not. It's just, this is the reality that when there's huge inequality right up against each other, that instability follows.
Right. That's the issue, is that when inequality gets to a certain level, then things start to go bad. And that's really the modern problem, right? How do you keep inequality to tolerable levels? Because inequality just means that there are some people that are innovating and doing better in society for whatever reasons. I mean, you can be cynical about it if you want, but there are some people, like, kind of there, and maybe they're getting some reward sort of thing. And on the other end, but hopefully at the other end, people are still prosperous enough to live a good life. And it's when it gets out of balance and you get rampant poverty and most wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, that's when you get Marxism, because you get just resentment and people want to make this all right through class struggle. And I mean, we've seen how that's worked out through the 20th century, essentially. And for them, essentially, it doesn't, where it's like you get rid of all inequality, but really you don't. And most people suffer for it. And it's about striking that balance. And of course, you need to have social policies and things like that try and mitigate rampant inequality and not have it become so ridiculous that it's just unmanageable and you get that resentment. And that's certainly what I support. And I think that's the balance that this is kind of looking for here.
For sure. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that it's not not a call to Marxism at all. Just this idea that ideally everyone does well, because that it just lessens the amount of conflict, like, dramatically.
Yeah, everyone does well. Not everyone does equally well.
Yes.
But with that, I think that's pretty much closed the book on today's reading of the Kalevala, Runo 2, Väinämöinen and Sowing. Just to recap a little bit, and if you were wanting a full rereading of the whole poem, it would actually take me like half an hour. So we're maybe going to look at doing that separately, but not as a part of these main episodes. But just as a little bit of a recap, so I think this was a fantastic look at the development of humanity from pre-agriculture to agriculture, to simplify things a little bit. But it went from all the way from essentially what I took as being the land right after the Ice Age, when it was barren, to the land eventually getting filled up with plants and nature. They had this god, Sampsa Pellervoinen, who was responsible for that. And then after that, it seems like there is just this nature, these great trees, as the example put it, that humanity can't overcome. They can't do anything about it. And then eventually you get this character of Copper, who has mastery of copper, who's able to take down these trees. And this is the beginnings of the mastery of tools, the mastery of wood in the forests, and being able to grow based on that, prosperity from all that. And then after that point, they start to experiment with agriculture, and it's sort of not necessarily working, just putting seeds kind of wherever. But then when Väinämöinen actually tries to clear a new field from the forest, he burns it, then he's finally able to create fields that are good enough. And this culture of slash and burn agriculture existed in Finland for a very long time, especially the area in where the Kalevala was composed and compiled. And then he got the results. He goes and sows the land. He prays to Ukko, which is something that was done for hundreds of years. Festivals to Ukko were still going on only a couple hundred years ago, maybe. And it got results. It got the sowing. He got he got the harvest, good harvest. And this is what everyone wants to emulate every year, really. But through all that, he still preserves some nature and wants the whole world to thrive. So really, really just an amazing, amazing poem that covers so much human development in really good detail, and they understand it. And this is really why I say that Väinämöinen is really this exemplar figure for humanity, but not in the sense of a god. He's not this sort of otherworldly thing. He is almost a representative of the best of humanity, something like that.
Yeah, kind of like an amalgamation or like an aggregate of like, this is human excellence and development and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's exactly how I see it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that so far.
Yeah, so I mean, going on from here, I mean, we've got some exciting stories coming up for sure. We get into what I think some people would consider more of the actual narrative stories. These two were important. Runo 1 and Runo 2 were important. They were developmental. They were the story of creation and the development of human civilization. Those aren't trivial things at all. Those are core myths, core mythologies, and central to people's beliefs, for sure. But from here, we're going to get into some pretty cool adventures, starting with Runo 3. So that will be our next story in the Kalevala. And with that, I think we're going to call this an episode. And so our usual acknowledgements. So first of all, the copy of the Kalevala we use, I'll show you. And this is Kalevala Land of Heroes by W.F. Kirby. And well, we use it because it's freely available. It's public domain essentially, and you can get it there. There's free Kindle editions if you want to follow along. There's other good translations out there, but we thought this was a good balance of something that we could also use freely. And so this one is a fantastic translation, and check it out and pick it up if you like. But any translation of the Kalevala should work just fine if you want to follow along. We also would be it'd be wrong if we did not acknowledge the influence of Dr. Jordan Peterson on this show. He is absolutely a primary influence on us and what we're doing here, especially his university lectures and his biblical series of lectures. Certainly the inspiration for the format of this show, and we're just applying it to Norse mythology, Finnish mythology, the myths and legends of Northern Europe. So we'll have a link to his YouTube channel, which is a fantastic resource if you want to learn more about the ideas that are behind our thinking on a lot of this stuff, as well as his recommended reading list, which is also a great resource if you want to learn more about archetypes and psychology and a lot of different things. So fantastic resource there. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're Northern Myths Podcast on Instagram, Northern Myths on Facebook and Twitter. I'm North Myth Luke, and Dan is North Myth Dan on Twitter. We're both on there personally. And come and connect with us. We love to hear from people, comments, have discussions. So yeah, come connect with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Please do, if you like the show, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to leave a review in your favorite podcast app, especially iTunes if you can. The reviews really help us to grow and to get to more people, so that would be a big help for us. And of course, if you wouldn't mind sharing this on your social media, if you enjoyed it as well, that would be a big help for us in that regard. So that'd be highly appreciated. And am I forgetting anything?
No, I think that's about it for ways to get in touch. Yeah, like, review, share, get in touch with us. Yeah, that's about it. And I guess with all that being done, there's only one thing left to do for all of us, and that's to go figure out the myth that you're living.
Perfect. This has been the Northern Myths Podcast, and thank you for joining us. Till next time.